After more than a year, there are finally updates in the case of 13-year-old Neziah Harris. Last month, a court decided to send Jarvis Butts to trial for Neziah's murder, even though at this point she still has not been found. They went over all of the other evidence, and what they're saying Jarvis did on January 9th is one of the worst things I've ever heard. That Tuesday, police say Neziah took this picture on her school tablet during class, and she sent 2 messages to Jarvis about meeting up at his auto shop later that afternoon. It was right there in her neighborhood, and her family says she went there a lot because Jarvis was supposed to be like an uncle to her. Neziah's Aunt Shannon had 5 kids with him, so he'd known Neziah since she was 2, but somehow everyone in this family claims that they did not know what was going on and had no idea that she was pregnant with his child. Now that afternoon, we can see Neziah got off her usual bus stop at 2:56 p.m., and instead of going home to her aunt or her grandma, she started walking to meet Jarvis. She was actually seen at his shop that evening too, just sitting in his truck while he worked, and running in and out of the gas station that was at the corner. Then around 7, Neziah even went with Jarvis and his coworker to drop off someone's car that they've been working on, and that coworker Cordell testified that once they all got back to the shop around 8:45 and he left to go home, Neziah and Jarvis were still there. No one ever saw Neziah again, and conveniently by 9 p.m., Jarvis had asked the mom of another one of his 13 kids if she would swap cars with him. By 9:30, he'd taken her Nissan and checked into Park Crest Hotel, and then he stayed there overnight and just didn't show up to work the next morning. There's this gap all day Wednesday where we don't know what Jarvis was doing, but by midnight, his phone records show that he'd driven another 30 minutes west to the intersection of 7 Mile and Burke. There's an abandoned parking lot there that backs up to the Rouge River, and he spent nearly 2 hours there in the middle of the night, down in the woods by the water. Neziah had been reported missing by the time he returned this car he was using, and at the time, no one realized that he'd left a pair of glasses in the back seat. A pair of glasses that looked just like the ones that belonged to his now missing niece, and that she had been wearing when she was last seen. So as we know, by February, the Detroit Police Department finally took over this case, and they were able to confirm that Neziah was last seen with Jarvis at his shop after school. He refused to admit any kind of inappropriate relationship with her, but on February 7th, he turned himself in on unrelated weapon charges. Then detectives actually listened to Jarvis's prison calls, and they heard him tell that coworker Cordell about how he had hidden a phone in the back seat of his car. They ended up finding it exactly where Jarvis said it was, along with proof of a horrifying relationship between him and Neziah. These messages between them dated all the way back to 2022, and from them it was clear Jarvis knew she was pregnant in November, and in December he was searching for ways on how to take the life of their child. He again tried to deny she was at his shop that day and said he never went near the Rouge River, but by this point, investigators already knew that he had. They searched the river from mile 8 all the way down past 96 in boats and on foot, and while they still have not found Neziah, they did find evidence that something horrible happened. During their initial search, they found children's clothes about 500 feet from the water, but at the time, police say they just did not pick them up because they had been told to look for a different pair of Neziah's shoes. It was March 14th when another group out searching found the same stuff, and they called 911, and that is when police realized that Neziah also had these red, black, and white Nikes. So they went back to the spot and finally brought her things in for testing, and horribly, they found both holes in Neziah's sweatshirt and Jarvis's DNA. I would think that the only reason why they didn't charge Jarvis then was because they were still hoping they could find Neziah and build a stronger case against him. As we know, they ended up charging him anyway in September, and at the hearing last month, the judge decided that this will go to trial. She described this case as a prime example of how much work needs to be done when it comes to protecting children, especially Black girls, and she said that what stood out the most for her was when Neziah's own family took the stand, how they showed zero emotion and could go to sleep at night not knowing if she was safe, and that it raises questions for them to be sending a 12-year-old girl to a car shop to hang out with grown men. The judge explained that these were grown women who likely suspected that something was going on, but that in the end, the real monster here is Jarvis. It's unclear when he will be seen in court next, but I will keep you guys updated here and on my other socials until there is finally justice for Neziah. Sydney Powell's conviction has just been overturned after she took her mom's life with a frying pan to hide that she failed out of college. If you know the case, you know Sydney attacked her mom with an iron skillet and a kitchen knife right as her university called to reveal that she was no longer a student there. She was found guilty, but again, the court has just overturned that conviction, and with her defense arguing she was suffering from a severe mental health episode, now she might not be held responsible. The details of this case are just horrible. According to prosecutors, on March 3rd, Sydney was still acting like she was a student at Mount Union, even though she'd been suspended way back in December for failing grades. Her dorm key still worked, so she was still trying to live there and was even accepting new sorority positions. But now finally, administrators were on the phone with Sydney's mom. Just as they were about to expose her secret, they heard loud bangs, screaming, and the line went dead. The staff then tried calling Brenda back, knowing it sounded like she was being attacked, and so when she didn't answer, they just kept calling her number until finally someone picked up. They asked Brenda if this was her and if she was okay, but while the person who had her phone said, "Yes, this is Brenda," now it was clearly Sydney pretending to be her mom. And then the line went dead again. Immediately, the university contacted Akron police where the family lived to request a welfare check, and about 30 minutes later, both officers and Sydney's dad had arrived at the scene. Sydney was just screaming that someone broke in and her mom told her to run away, and that basically when she came back, she had found Brenda on the ground. At this point, she reportedly shut down into a catatonic state while officers walked inside the house to a nightmare. They found Brenda alive in one of the bedrooms, but that she had tragically been beaten with a frying pan and then stabbed 30 plus times around her neck. Brenda was taken to the hospital where she died at just 50 years old, and Sydney was seemingly so traumatized that she was taken to a mental health care facility. She maintained that intruders did this but couldn't remember what they looked like, and with nothing actually stolen from their house, her story did not make sense. Within a few more days, Sydney was arrested, and while her family posted her bail and she went to live on her grandparents' farm until trial, police figured out why she did this. Detectives said that they actually immediately talked to Sydney's school and learned that she would have done anything so that her family would not find out that she was no longer a student there. Sydney had gone from having a 3.8 GPA in high school to being put on academic suspension her freshman year, but she didn't tell anyone. The school then warned her that she would be kicked out if her grades didn't improve, but as they got worse, she really acted like everything was fine. Eventually, Sydney was kicked out after the first semester of her sophomore year, but again, no one knew it. When the second semester started in January, she moved back to campus, even though she had no classes and technically nowhere to live. She only managed to get back into her dorm because her key still worked, but eventually staff was notified of that too and revoked her access. Even then, Sydney would just lurk around campus acting like she was still a student, all the way up until a week before the murder when security finally escorted her away. And I mean, you would think at this point this girl would have came clean and gone home, but instead, she kept up the act and she lived out of her car. Looking back, it is so clear her lies were already falling apart, and they actually could not have even gone on for one more day. As we know, on March 3rd, the school was calling Sydney's mom, and prosecutors argued at trial that she killed her to avoid facing the consequences of her lies. They said that she staged the scene and that she knew right from wrong, while her defense argued that she was suffering from a severe mental health episode and had no idea what she was doing. Ultimately, Sydney was found guilty but given the minimum sentence of 15 years to life, and now her conviction has been overturned based on arguments involving her mental health. It looks like she'll get a new trial, so I will keep you guys updated, hopefully here on TikTok, but if not, I am making all of the same content on Instagram and YouTube. If it comes down to it, I do hope to see you guys there, and just thank you so much for always sharing these stories with me.